Hey guys, Nintendo here, and this is my Nintendo Switch arcade cabinet dock. With this thing I can pop in my Switch, and the console is transformed into a full-size, fully functional arcade machine, perfect for games like Ultra Street Fighter 2 and Pokken Tournament Deluxe. Not only that, but with the press of a button, the cabinet can also function as a standalone PC and MAME arcade machine. And if that wasn't enough, there's also a mini fridge in the bottom so you can keep all your on-brand beverages cold. In this video, we'll take a look at how this Switch arcade dock works, and I'll show you how you can build one at home for less money than you might think. Let's get to it! Alright, so yes, this is a fully functional Nintendo Switch arcade machine that I built at home with just some tools and materials from my local hardware store. So let's take a look at how this thing actually works. The screen is just a budget 19-inch LCD TV mounted behind a bezel, and the Switch connects to this TV with a standard Switch dock, which is housed in a compartment just underneath the screen panel. Just below that are the controls, which, in the spirit of the Switch console itself, can each be removed and used as a standalone fight stick. This controller is the new NES30 Arcade Stick by 8BitDo, and it works over Bluetooth or USB for both Switch consoles and PC. If you'd like to pick up one of these, I'll leave a link to the product page in the description below. Speaking of PC, underneath the control deck I installed a drawer which houses a gaming laptop which can be used instead of the Switch to run PC games and emulators, converting the arcade dock into a working MAME cabinet. The marquee at the top of the unit is powered by a simple LED light fixture I found for under $20 at my hardware store, and the art was printed from my printer at home. Finally, the bottom of the cabinet houses a compact refrigerator which is hidden by a door on the front of the unit. Like I mentioned before, this Nintendo Switch arcade cabinet dock is great for playing two-player fighting games on the Switch, and I really think it gives a nostalgic arcade vibe to my game room. I definitely had a lot of fun putting this project together, and if you're interested in building an arcade dock at home, or if you're just curious about the work that went into it, I'm going to run through the steps that it took to take this dream to reality. So to kick things off, let's talk about design. When I set out to make this arcade cabinet dock, I had to decide whether I wanted to use a pre-built cabinet or build my own from scratch. In the end, I decided to make my own because it was relatively cheap and I wouldn't be destroying something that could otherwise be restored to its former glory. So in researching how to build something like this, I found a very useful tutorial from user Experimental on Instructables.com. This tutorial shows how to build an arcade cabinet from scratch on a tight budget. And lucky for me, they had a very similar idea and decided to build a mini fridge right into the unit to take up some of the otherwise unused space. This was a great starting point for my arcade dock design. Using the provided SketchUp design files, I modified the design to include a pull-out drawer for my gaming PC and a small recessed shelf to house the standard Nintendo Switch dock. I also redesigned the area for the controls because, lucky for me, I decided to use pre-built arcade sticks in this design for ease of use between Switch and PC, and so I didn't need to worry about wiring anything together. So this part of the cabinet ended up being more like a shelf than a compartment for electronics. After I finished my 3D design, I took to paper and laid out every piece I would need for the cabinet in 2D, so I could arrange them within 4x8 sheets of fiberboard and use as little material as possible. Again, if you're interested in building something like this for yourself, I'll have links to both the 3D and 2D layouts in the description. Once the 2D layout was finished, I was ready to go to the hardware store and pick up my supplies. So let's talk tools and materials. I'll have a full list of what's needed for this project in the description, but for now I'm just going to cover the basics. So the body of the cabinet is built using medium density fiberboard, or MDF for short. In order to cut the MDF to size, I needed an electric jigsaw. Now just to get it out there, if this sounds a little intimidating, do not worry. Before this project I had zero experience in woodworking, and if I can figure this out, I'm sure pretty much anybody can. In addition to the jigsaw, you'll need an electric drill for pre-drilling screw holes, and it's also nice to have an electric sander for preparing the cabinet before painting, although it's not absolutely necessary. Altogether, I paid about $70 for tools, and if you've already got one or two of these at home, you're already ahead of the game. Other than the 2 sheets of fiberboard, the other basic materials you'll need are some wooden rods. In my case, I used pine wood molding just to build sort of a frame to keep everything together. An assortment of screws, especially 1-inch wood screws, I used quite a few of those. Some drywall putty or spackling, which we'll use to fill in the wood before sanding and painting to make the surface smooth. Some non-water-based paint, in my case I used some oil-based spray paint. And a sheet of acrylic which we'll cut to size to make our marquee. So to get started, I took my 2D paper layout and transferred the design onto the sheets of fiberboard using a pencil to mark where the cuts needed to be made. Once that was finished, I used my jigsaw to cut along these lines and build the basic pieces needed for the final product. After some light sanding, the pieces are ready to be assembled. This is the fun part. It's really cool to see the whole cabinet come together. Working from my design, I used the pine wood molding to build a sort of frame for the fiberboard to attach to. After tons of screws and wood glue, the cabinet started to take shape. At this point, I was able to visualize where the TV would be mounted, and I marked a couple locations for the TV supports on the inside of the cabinet before attaching the pine wood bars. This is also when I decided to try out the LED fixture and marquee, which is really cool and kind of ties the whole thing together. The door is attached to the cabinet with a couple of kitchen cabinet hinges, and after it was installed, the machine was ready to be prepared for painting. In order to prep the fiberboard for paint, you'll want to fill the wood either with a wood filler or with a drywall putty. I found that in my case, spackling was the best tool for the job, and after the entire cabinet was covered and sanded, it was ready for a coat of paint. Again, you'll want to use a non-water-based paint because MDF has the tendency to sort of absorb water-based paints, which might affect the quality of the end product. So I decided to use an oil-based spray paint, which worked as a paint and primer in one. For the art on the sides of the cabinet, I made a large stencil with my printer and used it as a template for the Switch logo. And finally, once the paint was dried, it was time to assemble the final parts. Like I'd tested before, I installed the TV with the pine wood supports in the top of the cabinet, and covered the screen with a bezel I cut out of just some black posterboard. The Switch dock was placed in the recessed shelf below, and the controllers fit perfectly into the section below that. I hooked up my gaming laptop in its drawer, and loaded the mini fridge into the large compartment underneath. The power cords for each device, the marquee at the top, the TV, the Switch dock, and the laptop, were all routed to a power strip which powers the whole unit. I decided to keep the fridge's power supply separate so that I could turn off the cabinet without having to spoil any of the precious foods within the fridge. And that's about all there is to it. At this point, the arcade dock is ready to go. Just plug in your Switch and start playing. Overall, this project was a ton of work, but also a lot of fun to put together. And again, like I said, I'm a total stranger to woodworking, but I was able to sort of wing it and work my way through this build, so if you'd like to make one at home, I'm sure you can too. And it was a great learning experience, so I'd love to do something like this again. Thank you so much for watching this video, and be sure to let me know in the comments what you think about this Switch arcade cabinet dock, or what other DIY projects you'd like to see in the future. If you got something out of the video, it would mean a lot if you would share it with your friends. That helps out the channel so much. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Nintendo for all sorts of cool gaming content. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye! Hey guys, thanks again for sticking it out to the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed this new project. I put a ton of work into it, and I hope it was as entertaining to watch as it was to build. If you like what I do and would like to help out the channel, I've got a link to my Patreon on the right side of your screen, and otherwise I'll see you in the next video. Take care.